I discovered my husband was having micro affairs on social media with various women, flirting and sending inappropriate messages while I took care of our home and our children. But what he didn't expect was that I would use those very same social media platforms to expose everything publicly and show our entire family who he really was. His reaction when he saw that he had lost not only his devoted wife, but also the reputation he so cherished was simply unforgettable. I had always been the perfect wife in everyone's eyes, the one who smiled in family photos, who prepared impeccable dinners, who never complained. But behind that facade of a happy marriage, I was dying inside every time I saw another suspicious notification on his phone, every time he lied about working late when he was actually feeding his ego by chatting with strangers online. For years, I swallowed my pain in silence until one day I decided I wouldn't be the fool in the story anymore. And what came after that changed everything forever. My hands trembled as I held his phone, tears streaming down my face. It was 3 in the morning, and I was sitting on the cold bathroom floor, reading message after message he had sent to at least 5 different women. Women he called beautiful, gorgeous, my dream, while he could barely say good morning to me for months. I could hear his breathing in the next room, sleeping peacefully, as if nothing was happening, as if he hadn't just destroyed 12 years of marriage with his virtual micro affairs that he thought were harmless. My chest ached so much that I had to place my hand there to make sure my heart was still beating, because at that moment, I felt completely dead inside, invisible, replaceable, as if all those years I had dedicated my entire life to him and our children meant absolutely nothing. One of the conversations was with a woman from his work. He said she understood him in a way I never did, that she was fun and interesting, and that he loved her bikini stories. I read that and felt such strong nausea that I had to grip the sink to keep from fainting. The messages dated back weeks, some from months ago. There were even late-night conversations when he claimed he was dealing with work issues, but was actually sending hearts and flirts to complete strangers. One of them had even commented, "Your smile is lovely," on a photo of him, and he replied, "You're the one who makes everything more beautiful around here." I knew that photo. It was one I had taken of him on our wedding anniversary. At that moment, sitting on that icy floor with the bitter taste of betrayal in my mouth, I realized I had been a complete idiot for years. While I worried about being the best possible wife, he was distributing crumbs of affection to women who had no idea he was married with 2 children at home. The worst part wasn't even the messages themselves. It was realizing that he had time and emotional energy to flirt with strangers, but didn't have 5 minutes to ask me about my day. That he could be charming and attentive with them, but with me, he was just indifferent and distant. I looked in the bathroom mirror and saw a woman I no longer recognized, eyes swollen from crying, disheveled hair, wearing an old nightgown because how long had it been since I bothered to get dressed up, thinking it wouldn't make a difference anyway. It was at that exact moment that something inside me finally broke, but instead of completely destroying me, that break began to transform me into someone I never imagined I could be. Before we continue, I want to take a moment to thank each of you who are here watching and listening to my story. You have no idea how important it is for me to share this experience that completely changed my life. If you're enjoying this content and want to keep following real stories of triumph, transformation, and rebirth, please subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell so you don't miss any new videos, and leave a like below because that really helps me continue bringing these narratives to you. I created this channel because I deeply believe that our stories have the power to heal, inspire, and strengthen other people who might be going through similar situations right now. And when you subscribe and share, you're helping these stories reach those who truly need to hear them. Many of you watching me now might be experiencing something similar, feeling alone, feeling like no one will understand your pain, but I want you to know that you are not alone and that there's an entire community here to support each other. So please become part of this family by subscribing to the channel. And now let's go back to that terrible night in the bathroom, because what happened after that moment of pain was the beginning of a journey I never imagined I'd be able to take. To understand how I ended up on that bathroom floor at 3 in the morning, completely shattered, I need to go back to the beginning of our story, when I met Michael 14 years ago at a mutual friend's party. He was everything I thought I wanted in a man back then. Funny, attentive, always with a kind word. He gradually won me over with good morning texts every day, with calls just to see how I was. with that way of making me feel like the most special woman in the world. We dated for 2 years before getting married, and during all that time, he was the perfect boyfriend, the one he proudly introduced to his family, who planned our future together, who talked about having children and building a life by my side. I perfectly remember our wedding day, how he cried when he saw me walking into the church, how he held my hands during our vows and promised to love and respect me forever. And I believed every word, because back then, I didn't yet know that words are easy to say, but actions are what truly matter. The first few years were genuinely good, or at least I thought they were. We had our routine, our dreams, our plans. He worked a lot, and I supported his every decision because I believed we were building something together. When I became pregnant with our first child, Luke, I was on cloud nine with happiness. I thought it would bring us even closer, that we would be that perfect family I had always dreamed of having. But it was precisely during my pregnancy that things began to change subtly, so subtly that I didn't even notice it at first. Michael started spending more time on his phone, always with the excuse that it was work, that he needed to reply to important messages, that he had discussion groups about projects. I believed him because I never had reason to doubt him. I was focused on preparing the nursery, on reading about motherhood, on getting ready for that new phase of our lives. When Luke was born, I completely immersed myself in motherhood, waking up in the middle of the night to breastfeed, spending my days taking care of a baby who cried a lot. And Michael increasingly distanced himself with the excuse that he needed to work even more to support the family now that we had another mouth to feed. I understood, or at least tried to understand, even when he came home late and barely looked at our son, even when I pleaded for help and he said he was too tired, even when I noticed he spent hours in the bathroom with his phone in hand, claiming he was relaxing. 3 years later came Sarah, our second child, and by this point, I was already completely physically and emotionally exhausted. Yet I still kept trying to be the perfect wife, the perfect mother, the one who never complained, who always had a smile on her face, who kept the house immaculate, even with 2 small children. Michael practically didn't touch me anymore. He said he was stressed with work, that he was tired, that he wasn't in the mood for those things, and I accepted it as if it were normal, as if it were just a phase every couple goes through. But what hurt the most wasn't the lack of physical intimacy, it was the lack of emotional connection. It was realizing that he was more interested in being on his phone than in talking to me, that he laughed at things he saw on the screen but barely smiled with me, that he dressed more carefully to go out than when he stayed at home. I started to feel invisible in my own home, as if I were just the maid, the nanny, the cook, but not his wife, not the woman he loved. I tried to talk to him several times, sitting next to him and asking if everything was okay, if he still loved me, if I had done something wrong. And he always replied that I was crazy, that I was imagining problems, that he was just busy, but that he did love me. It was then that I started noticing small details I had previously ignored, like how he always turned his phone screen face down when I came near, how he put a password on his device and changed it frequently, how he smiled differently when he was typing something, how he got irritated when I asked who he was talking to. One time, I innocently commented that I had seen a message notification on his phone while he was in the shower, and he exploded, saying I had no right to go through his things, that he had a right to privacy, that I was being controlling and insecure. That made me question if I was really going crazy, if the problem was with me, if I was being too paranoid. I talked to some friends, and most of them said men are just like that all of them look at other women on social media, that it didn't mean anything, that it was just male ego. So I tried to accept it and focus on being a better wife, more understanding, less clingy, as he had once called me. I tried even harder, cooked his favorite dishes, dressed up more, even when exhausted, tried to initiate conversations about topics he liked, but none of it made a difference. He remained distant, remained glued to his phone, continued making me feel inadequate and insufficient. The exact moment everything changed was on a seemingly normal Thursday. I was preparing dinner while the children played in the living room, and Michael's phone rang on the kitchen table where he'd forgotten it while taking a shower. Normally, I would never touch his phone. I respected his privacy, even when he didn't respect my peace of mind. But something inside me that day simply compelled me to look. The notification on the screen read, "Carrie, you're driving me crazy with those hints," and my heart simply stopped. My hands started sweating, and before I could think rationally, I was already unlocking his phone. The password was his birthday, because he never used dates related to me or the children for anything. What I saw in those next minutes completely destroyed the person I was, but at the same time gave birth to someone much stronger. It wasn't just one conversation, there were dozens of them with different women, some from work, others from social media, each receiving a little piece of the attention he denied me every day. He flirted shamelessly, sent his own photos with suggestive captions, liked and commented on their photos, calling them gorgeous, perfect, hot, words he hadn't used with me in years. I saved everything, my hands trembling and my heart racing. I took screenshots of every conversation, every social media comment, every suspicious like. I sent it all to my own email while I heard the shower still running and the children laughing in the living room, having no idea their mother's world was collapsing. Those were 20 of the most intense minutes of my life. I cried silently as I discovered that the woman he called boring was actually the wife who wasn't part of his online life. He had profiles on dating apps claiming to be single, had conversations where he talked about meeting these women in person, and had even arranged to grab coffee with one of them to get to know her better. When I finally heard the shower turn off, I quickly erased my tracks from his phone, put everything back exactly as it was, and continued making dinner as if nothing had happened. But inside, I was a completely different person. That night, after he slept peacefully beside me as if he hadn't just destroyed our marriage, I stayed awake staring at the ceiling and making the most important decision of my life. I would no longer be the silent victim. I would no longer accept crumbs of affection while he distributed banquets to strangers. I would do something about it, but in an intelligent, calculated, precise way. In the following days, I became a professional actress, continuing to be the devoted wife on the outside, while inside, I was planning every step of what was to come. I created a fake social media account, a woman attractive enough to catch his attention, but not so obvious as to raise suspicion, and I began to interact with his posts, liking here, commenting there, always subtly, but with interest. It took only 3 days for him to send a private message to my fake profile, asking if we knew each other from somewhere, saying he found my profile interesting, and I replied in a friendly but not overly enthusiastic way, making him work a little harder. Meanwhile, in real life, I was documenting absolutely everything. Every time he lied about where he was, every time he said he was working but the conversations showed he was flirting, every time he refused to spend time with the children but had plenty of time to comment on bikini photos of strangers. I also began to reconnect with old friends I had put aside because of the marriage. I spoke with a lawyer friend of my cousin just to understand my rights. I started saving money in an account he didn't know existed, small amounts here and there that I saved from the grocery budget. The most important thing of all was that I needed absolute certainty that I wasn't going crazy, that what I was feeling was real and not just insecurity on my part, as he so often insisted. So I continued interacting with him through the fake profile, letting him flirt, letting him send increasingly inappropriate messages, letting him even arrange a meeting that I obviously wouldn't attend, all while he came home and treated me with indifference, or worse, with irritation when I asked for any kind of attention. It was during these weeks that I realized something fundamental. The problem was never with me. It was never about me not being good enough, pretty enough, interesting enough. The problem was his and his sick need for external validation, to feel desired, to feed an ego so fragile that it needed multiple women constantly praising him. This understanding was liberating in a way I can't even describe. It was as if years of guilt and insecurity finally dissolved, and in their place, a crystal clear understanding of who I really was and what I deserved emerged. I deserved respect. I deserved to be valued. I deserved a partner who saw me as a priority and not an obligation. And if Michael couldn't give me that, then he didn't deserve the privilege of having me in his life. The execution of my plan began methodically and carefully because I knew I had only one chance to do it correctly and there could be no mistakes or regrets. First, I organized all the evidence I had collected over weeks into well-categorized digital folders, one for each woman he was talking to, one for his fake profiles on dating apps, one for all the inappropriate comments he made publicly on social media, and a special one with all the conversations between him and my fake profile where he clearly stated he was available and interested in meeting another woman. I printed the most compromising conversations and stored them in a sealed envelope, along with digital copies on 3 different flash drives. One stayed with me, one I left with my best friend, and another I kept at my mother's house because I had learned that evidence can disappear and I couldn't take that risk. In parallel, I began to strengthen my support network, reconnecting with friends I hadn't seen in ages because Michael always made excuses for us not to go out, inventing that we needed to save money, that I should stay home more with the children, but now I understood it was just control disguised as concern. The second step was to secure my financial independence. I discreetly spoke with my former boss about the possibility of returning to work, explained my situation without going into too much detail, and she immediately offered me a part-time position that would allow me to be with the children most of the time, but still earn my own income. I started working, telling Michael it was just volunteer work at a nonprofit, and he didn't question it much because, deep down, he was happy to have even more time alone for his virtual conversations. Every penny I earned went directly into my secret account. In 3 months, I had already saved enough to support myself for at least 6 months if necessary, and that gave me a sense of power I hadn't felt in years. Meanwhile, I continued to be the seemingly perfect wife at home, cooking meals, taking care of the children, keeping everything organized. But now there was a fundamental difference. I wasn't doing it because I thought it was my obligation or because I wanted to please him. I was doing it because these were my choices, and I was in control of the situation. Michael didn't notice any change because he never truly looked at me. To him, I was just part of the furniture, something always there when he needed it, but not deserving of real attention. The most delicate part of the plan was deciding how and when to expose everything. I knew it wasn't enough to just confront him privately because he would simply deny it, minimize it, make me out to be crazy, as he always did whenever I questioned anything. So, I decided the exposure needed to be public enough that he couldn't simply sweep everything under the rug and continue his life of lies. First, I created a video compilation with screenshots of the most compromising conversations, obviously censoring the very intimate parts so as not to expose the other women who probably didn't even know he was married, and added a simple narration explaining that this was the man who posted happy family photos while emotionally betraying his wife every day. I didn't publish it immediately. I kept it as a final weapon if needed, because my goal wasn't to publicly destroy him. My goal was to have the option to do so if he tried to defame or harm me in any way. Next, I scheduled individual conversations with key people in his life. His mother, who always treated me as if I wasn't good enough for her perfect son. His sister, who constantly gave me unsolicited advice on how to be a better wife. And his 2 best friends, whom I suspected knew about his betrayals and simply pretended not to see. The decisive moment arrived on a Friday evening when Michael casually announced that he was going out with work friends to de-stress a bit. But the conversations on his phone, which I still discreetly monitored, showed that he had actually arranged to finally meet in person one of the women he had been flirting with for weeks. I simply smiled and said, "All right, have fun," and he was visibly surprised because I usually complained when he went out and left me alone with the children. But this time, there was no drama, no questions, just a calm wife wishing her husband good night. What he didn't know was that I had already put the final phase of the plan into action. That same afternoon, I had sent messages to all the women he was talking to using an anonymous profile, revealing that he was married and had 2 children, attaching screenshots of his conversations with me where he talked about his family, photos of us together, everything that proved he was lying to all of them. Most responded with shock and anger. Some thanked me for telling the truth. Others simply blocked the profile without replying. But the important thing was that now they knew who he really was. I also sent a detailed email to his company's HR department with copies of the inappropriate conversations he had with coworkers, not necessarily so he would be fired, but so it would be officially documented that he used the professional environment to harass women. This would be important if he tried to harm me financially later. Michael returned home that night much earlier than I expected. It was only 10:30 when I heard the key in the door, and by the expression on his face, I already knew something had gone terribly wrong with his plans. He stormed in furiously, phone in hand, and yelled, "What did you do?" before even fully closing the door. I was sitting calmly on the sofa, the children already asleep in their rooms, and simply looked at him with a serenity I didn't know I was capable of having in a moment like that. "I did what you should have done a long time ago. I told the truth," I replied, with a firm voice that no longer trembled as before. And I watched the color drain from his face when he realized I knew everything, absolutely everything. He tried to deny it at first, saying I had invaded his privacy, that I had no right to go through his phone, that I had ruined his reputation by sending those messages to the women and to his work. But I simply took out my own phone and started showing him screenshot after screenshot, conversation after conversation, lie after lie. With each image I showed, his face grew paler, his arguments weaker, until finally he collapsed onto the sofa, his head in his hands, and began to cry, saying he had made a terrible mistake, that he didn't know what had come over him, that it didn't mean anything. It was at that moment that I felt an absolute calm wash over me. Years of pain and humiliation finally being validated. Because now it was no longer my word against his. It was no longer me being called crazy or insecure. It was undeniable facts on the phone screen. It didn't mean anything? I asked with a voice that cut like ice. So while I was here raising your children, taking care of your home, being faithful and dedicated, you were distributing attention and affection to women who meant nothing. If they meant nothing, what does that say about what I mean to you? If I received even less attention than them? He had no answer. He just kept his face in his hands, his shoulders trembling. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel sorry for him. I didn't feel the need to comfort him or to minimize my pain to make him feel better. I continued. You made me feel invisible, inadequate, crazy for questioning behavior that any sensible person would question. You emotionally manipulated me while feeding your ego with multiple women. And now you're crying because you got caught, not because you're genuinely remorseful. I then took the envelope that was hidden under the sofa cushion and placed it on the coffee table in front of him. Here are printed copies of everything, all the conversations, all the fake profiles, every time you lied about where you were and who you were talking to. I have digital copies saved in 3 different places, so don't even think about destroying this. Michael finally lifted his face, eyes red and swollen, and tried to approach me, saying he loved me, that he would change, that it had just been a midlife crisis phase, that he had never actually physically cheated, so it wasn't that serious. I took a step back and said firmly, "Don't you dare try to minimize what you did. Betrayal isn't just physical. You betrayed my trust every single day. You shared parts of yourself with other women while I begged for crumbs of attention. You made me feel like I was the problem, when the problem was always you and your pathological need for external validation. It was then that I played my final card. I don't want your repentance now that you've been caught. I want you to leave this house tonight and go to your mother's place. Tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock, you will come back here, and we will have a civilized conversation about how we will proceed with the separation, about child custody, and the division of assets. And if you attempt in any way to defame me, harm me financially, or use the children as a weapon, I will make public every screenshot, every conversation, every lie, and you will lose not only your wife, but also the reputation you so cherish." The expression on his face changed from despair to shock. He truly didn't expect me to have the courage to ask him to leave, to take control of the situation, to be so firm and decisive. He tried to argue that it was his house too, that he had a right to stay, but I simply opened the door and said, "You have 2 minutes to pack a bag with the basics and leave, or I'll call my lawyer right now and she'll explain to you exactly what your rights are when there's a record of workplace harassment and evidence of attempted multiple infidelity, and how that can affect not only asset division but also child custody." That was enough to make him move. He staggered to the bedroom, grabbed some clothes and personal items, and before leaving through the door, he tried one last time. "The kids will miss me. You can't keep me from them like this." I took a deep breath and replied, "The children will see their father regularly. That has never been in question. What is in question is whether you will continue to have the privilege of having me in your life as your wife, and the answer to that right now is no. Now, please leave and give us space to breathe." When the door finally closed behind him, I sat on the sofa and began to cry. But they were no longer tears of despair or humiliation. They were tears of liberation, of relief, of finally putting an end to years of silent suffering. For the first time in a long time, I could breathe deeply without feeling that constant weight in my chest. And even without knowing exactly what the future held, I knew that anything would be better than continuing to live that way, invisible and devalued in my own home. The first few days after that night were the most emotionally difficult, not because I regretted my decision, but because explaining to 2 small children that Daddy wasn't going to live with us anymore was heartbreaking. Luke, who was 6 years old, was very confused and angry with me at first, thinking it was my fault that his father had left, and Sarah, only 3, cried every night asking for Daddy. There were moments when I questioned whether I had done the right thing, whether I shouldn't have given him another chance, whether I shouldn't have just swallowed everything in silence for the sake of the children. But then I remembered how I felt when I was in that marriage, invisible, humiliated, constantly doubting my own worth, and I knew the children deserved to see a strong and respected mother, not a broken and unhappy one. I spoke with a child psychologist who helped me find the right words to explain the situation in an age-appropriate way, emphasizing that Daddy and Mommy still loved them very much, that none of it was their fault, and that sometimes adults need to live separately to be better people. We established a visitation schedule where Michael saw the children on weekends, and surprisingly, over time, he became a more present father than he had ever been. Perhaps because he now had to make the most of the limited time he had with them, perhaps because he finally understood what he had almost completely lost. As for us two, in the first few months, he made attempts at reconciliation. He sent long messages talking about how he had gone to therapy, how he had understood his mistakes, how he wanted to win back my trust. I read every message, carefully considered every word, but deep down, I knew something inside me had changed irreversibly. It was no longer about forgiving or not forgiving the micro affairs. It was about realizing that I had spent years molding myself to be the perfect wife for someone who never truly saw me. And now that I had rediscovered myself, I no longer wanted to go back to being that small, invisible version of myself. I told him I appreciated the effort, that I believed he was genuinely remorseful, but that the damage had been so profound that I needed time and space to discover who I was outside of that marriage. It was 6 months of official separation before we began the divorce process, and during that time, something extraordinary happened. I fell in love with my own company. I learned to cherish the nights alone after the children were asleep, where I could read, watch whatever I wanted, simply exist without needing to please anyone or monitor someone else's mood. I went back to painting, something I loved to do before getting married, but gave up because Michael said it was a waste of time, and I discovered I had a real talent that had been dormant for years. Financially, things were tough at first. Even with child support and part-time work, money was tighter than when we were a dual-income family. But there was a freedom in that financial difficulty. I knew exactly how much I had, how much I spent, and I no longer had to ask permission or justify every purchase to someone who spent money on virtual gifts for strangers on social media while complaining when I bought something for myself. Eventually, I managed to increase my work hours as the children grew and adapted to the new routine, and 2 years after the separation, I was already in a comfortable financial position. I had even managed to rent a larger apartment in a better neighborhood where the children each had their own bedroom, and I finally had a small space that I turned into a painting studio. Michael, for his part, had his own consequences to face. Several of the women he flirted with publicly blocked him, and some even made vague posts about married men who lie on social media, which affected his social reputation. At work, he received an official warning and lost a promotion that was practically guaranteed. And his mother, when she finally understood what he had done, was so disappointed that she went months without speaking properly to him. Her perfect son had fallen from his pedestal. Today, 4 years after that night on the bathroom floor, I am a completely different person from the broken woman who was there. I have a job I love and where I am valued. I have two incredible children who see in their mother an example of strength and dignity. I have true friendships that I cultivate carefully. And most importantly, I have self-respect and self-love that I never had before. Michael and I have developed a cordial co-parenting relationship. He is a present father for the children and has finally respected the boundaries I set. He also went to genuine therapy and offered me formal apologies not only for the micro affairs, but for years of emotional manipulation and neglect. I accepted his apologies because holding grudges serves no one, but that didn't mean going back. It meant closing that chapter with peace and moving forward. As for romantic love, it took me 3 years to allow myself to consider dating again, and when I finally met someone, it was in a completely different way. Someone who truly sees me, who values my company, who doesn't hide their phone when I'm around because they have nothing to hide. We are still getting to know each other, and I don't know if it will work out, but the difference is that now I know exactly what I deserve and what I will no longer tolerate, and that clarity is the greatest gift all that pain gave me. I look back and see that the woman on the bathroom floor wasn't just discovering her husband's betrayal, she was discovering her own strength, and that discovery changed absolutely everything. Now I want to turn my face to you who are watching me right now and ask a very important question. Did you identify with this story? Have you been through something similar? These micro affairs, this feeling of being invisible in your own home, the emotional manipulation and gaslighting that made you question your own sanity? Or do you know someone who is going through this right now? Someone who deserves to hear this story, to know that they are not alone and that there is a way out of this darkness? Leave a comment below. Share with me which part of this story touched you most deeply, which moment you saw yourself reflected, because your comments not only help me understand you better, but also help other women feel that their experiences are validated and real. Some of you might be feeling that it's too late, that you should have left this situation years ago, that perhaps you're too weak to face this journey alone. But I want you to know that it's never too late to reclaim your life, never too late to decide that you deserve respect and dignity, and never too late to discover the strength that exists within you, waiting to be unleashed. If you are in this situation now, if you are feeling invisible, humiliated, or constantly questioning your own worth, I want you to know that the first thing you need to do is lift your heart to God in prayer, because He does not want you to live in despair or disrespect within your marriage. The Bible tells us that God wants abundance and life for us, but this full life often begins when we connect with Jesus Christ and strengthen ourselves through faith and a community of faith. Seek out a Christian community near you, a church where you can find spiritual and emotional support, where you can talk with pastors and other women who understand your pain and can guide you in the light of God's word. Do not try to carry this burden alone, because you were not created for that. You were created to be loved, respected, and valued both by God and by whomever you choose to share your life with. If you are in immediate danger or an abusive situation, seek professional help. Report it, contact the competent authorities, but meanwhile, anchor your soul in God because He is the only true security. Thank you endlessly for listening to my story this far, for walking with me through this journey of pain and transformation. Your presence here means everything to me. So please come back next week for more stories of triumph, more stories of women who refuse to accept less than they deserve, and who discovered that when you put your faith in God, nothing is impossible.